Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and this is My Life as a Landlord. I am so pleased that you're educating yourself in your landlord journey and joining me in today's show. Today, we're exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for the great state of Alaska. In all of my location-specific episodes, I've included hyperlinks to all kinds of resources, in this case, the state of Alaska and the Alaska Landlord and Tenant Act. Each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering four questions. One, what are the basics of the Alaska Landlord and Tenant Act? Two, what are the nuances of this location compared to other locations? What's missing? What's different? We're going to look at that. Three, some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in Alaska. And four, where to get help in the local area in Alaska. And there's actually so many resources, it's quite impressive. But I must tell you that there are very likely more guiding documents, more items that are particular to your location in Alaska. So this is not all inclusive. This is just going to get you started. So make sure you do your own research. Do not rely solely on this because things do and can change. Here we go. I've got to give a plug for today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments LLC. If you want to see what Michael and I are doing in our real estate world, you want to know more about real estate investing, check out alohajv.com. Okay, so let's jump into this. If you're watching this on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, I'm going to share screen and you're going to see, here we go, the Alaska Landlord Tenant Act and what it means to you. This is a 60-page document and it is put on by, looks like the Department of Law, which is really interesting. And this is quite inclusive as we go through this. I'm going to show you some of the other resources as well. There's like 4 or 5 more. But because Alaska is so rural, there's quite a bit of help. It's pretty interesting. Now, if this is your first time listening to a location-specific podcast, I will tell you, typically this is not the norm. This is why I do these in tranches all at the same time, right? This is part of a tranche of 10 location-specific episodes that we do periodically. And the reason that we do them this way is because there is really no format. We're answering those 4 questions, but it's very choppy, right? We kind of have a checklist of the things that we're looking for. We want to make sure we hit the high points. We want to take notice of what's missing, what's different, but it can jump around quite a bit. So bear with me as we go through this. This is very much designed to get you started on your own landlord journey and then absolutely do your own research, but it doesn't flow as a normal episode with a guest or a topic. It's very different. And that's kind of why we did these kind of tranches of location specific podcasts because it's very herky jerky kind of thing. But okay, there it is. There you've got it. I'm just going to start going through this one. This one is the most comprehensive version of this, but this is the guide. Now, for you want to know that, sorry, hang on, let me keep going. So the act itself is actually a law. Now, this isn't the act itself. This is the guide that explains the act. The act is, hang on, I'm just going to float through here. Do I even have the act on here? Lawyer? No, I don't. Okay, so the act, I'm sure it's in one of these hyperlinks, but it's very legal, right? Because any tenancy laws is a law. And so this is the guide though. So just so you're aware on how this all works. So these are all hyperlinks. If you have a question, you can jump right to it. I love it when they do that, which is really great. And 60 pages for this. It includes some pre-made forms. So let's just hit the table of contents here. So the definitions, moving in, about all the different things here, late charges, what to watch for, standard form agreements, which is always a good thing to use the standard form agreements. Mobile home rentals, that's been thrown in here, which is different because if somebody owns their own mobile home, it's not a rental necessarily. You're not providing the dwelling, you're providing the land. But in this case, they've thrown it in here. Lease, security deposit. Where are the security deposits kept? That's always interesting. When there's a new owner, walkthrough, living by the rules, enforcing the rules, living in a rental property. So this is ongoing. Landlord's responsibilities, maintenance, tenant remedies, remedies for landlord's non-compliance in general. That happens. The Landlord and Tenant Act provides to the tenant if the landlord needs to get in. The lowdown on locks. Can the landlord raise the rent? condemned premises, subleasing, lawful reasons for denial. These are all really interesting and quite comprehensive. Then it talks a lot about moving out, all of these different ones about termination for tenancy, late rent, illegal activities, breach of duties, abandonment. We're going to talk about this because we're going to talk about abandoned belongings is right there. What to do, retaliation by the landlord. This is all the high points that we want to talk about is in here. Did I see late fee? Yes, I did. Late charges. Okay, we're going to get into some of this. I'm just going down through. And then they've got sample notice forms. Please, if you are a landlord in Alaska, do not make your own forms. Use the ones they have first. If there is any question, concern, then you can call your local legal aid society or any of your help or your local attorney. But please use the pre-made forms. When you're trying to reinvent the wheel that doesn't need to be reinvented, it's right here. Okay, let's go through this. So this is a lot of definitions. This is kind of weird because they're not in alphabetical order. They're just sort of randomly thrown on there, but it's on there. Lease, rental agreement, forcible entry, and detainer. This is something that I've seen in other locations as well, an FED, forcible entry and detainer, a lawsuit filed in court by a property owner to evict a person from the property. Basically, it's a writ of possession is a different way that other places say it. But these cases often involve landlords evicting tenant. It also may involve property owners evicting trespassers or squatters. Okay, so it goes through here where rent is paid, late charges. The Landlord Tenant Act does not state whether landlords may assess late charges when the rent or late is the late fees or when a check is returned for insufficient funds. It may be legal for the rental agreement to specify a small flat rate charge for an NSF fee, but it's got to actually approximate back to the actual charge for the NSF fee. And then no automatic late charge or NSF fee is legally enforceable. It has been agreed upon beforehand. Even if the late fees are enforceable, a tenant cannot be evicted for failure to pay the late fee. So it doesn't say what the late fee could be, but if they don't pay the rent on time, that's a problem. You can have the late fee. I put the late fees are in the lease. It's just standard fee in there. It's depending on the location is amount what it is. Sometimes it's a percentage, sometimes it's a flat fee. It's location dependent. This is a question you can ask your local landlord group, or if you are talking with anyone from legal aid, you can say, what is a reasonable late fee that I can pay? And it'll either be a dollar amount or a percentage. Okay, what to watch out for. This is trying to do stuff in bad faith on a lease. You don't want to do that. Mobile home rentals, I'm not even going to go through that because we are talking about rentals here. What's a security deposit? Many landlords demand, okay, so this is about security deposits. Except for rentals renting for more than $2,000 a month, security deposits and prepaid rent may not total more than 2 months rent. And yeah, and this is an important point. A landlord may require an additional deposit of up to 1 more month's rent as security against damage caused by pets other than service animals. So when we're talking about animals here, you've got pets, emotional support animals, and service animals. This spells out you cannot charge a pet deposit for a service animal. Everything else is fair game. So you want to make sure you are clear about this. How we do it. They're also talking about a non-refundable application fee to place a prospective tenant on a waiting list. If an actual application fee covers the actual reasonable costs, it is probably lawful. However, you can't just however, it's not lawful to charge a fee that becomes a security deposit if the tenant moves in but then has forfeited if the tenant decides not to take the rental. Basically, you have to pay by the rules, guys. Like, come on. Where are the deposits kept? This is important. Deposits and prepaid rent must be kept by the landlord or property manager in a trust account in a bank or savings and loan association or with a licensed escrow agent. Exceptions could be made if it would be impractical to bank the money, for example, in rural Alaska, because Alaska is so big and vast. Trust account can be any separate savings or checking account labeled trust account used only for deposits and prepaid rent. Now, this is a very simple thing. If any security deposit is not your money as the landlord, it is the tenant's money. You want to put it in a non-operating account. It is not your money. It needs to be kept somewhere separate. And you just simply do this. Wherever you're banking for all your rentals and all of the things that you have, simply open up a savings account, or you can phone the bank and say, I need to have a separate account for my deposits from my tenants. Should it be a savings account? Should it be a checking account? Most of the time it'll be a savings account, but it could be another checking account. It's not like you're going to write a check from there unless you're actually paying it out, right? But you want to make sure that it is a completely separate account. And then, of course, once you file your taxes, people are going to ask what that money is. It's not your money. It's a liability. You have to pay it back to the tenant. Okay, so but you also want to make sure it is labeled trust account used only for deposits and prepaid rent. An additional pet deposit, we talked about this. Let's see, when can the deposits be applied to unpaid rent or damages? Deposits can only be applied to unpaid rent or damages or returned to the tenant at the termination of the tenancy. Neither landlords nor tenants can use deposits to cover unpaid rent or damages while the tenancy is ongoing. And it goes on. There's an example, talks about what happens if the unit is sold, doing a walkthrough, doing a condition inspection before and at the end, enforcing the rules, changing the rules. What if the landlord or the tenant changes their mind? This is before it even starts. What happens then? When is discrimination legal? There's a couple of spots that you want to make sure you're really clear, and it's got right in here, Alaska State Commission for Human Rights. If you've got a question before you start saying yes or no, you want to, especially if you're saying no. So here is another thing. This is really interesting for Alaska, and this also applies to several other locations that I've studied. Each landlord may choose whether he or she wishes to rent to smokers. Neither state nor federal law in the United States makes smokers a protected class. I typically do not rent to smokers at all, even if they vape. So you just want to make sure that you are being very clear on discrimination or not. So declining someone because they're a smoker is not illegal. It is okay. Living in a rental property, property maintenance. I'm not going to go through all this. I'm just going to kind of scroll down. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to see this. You can also click on the hyperlink yourself. But you want to make sure if you are a landlord in Alaska, especially if you're a new landlord in Alaska, you want to make sure you know the rules of the game that you are playing. Landlord's rules, landlord's remedies. If the landlord needs to get in, there's got to be a good reason with proper notice. The landlord's got to give the tenant 24 hours notice. Notice, it doesn't say written notice, but notice, right? And the landlord cannot abuse the right to request entry or use it to harass the tenants. Yeah, the lowdown on locks. So tenants can insist that the landlord repair or replace the locks if the resident is not secure. You want to, come on, landlords, you want a place that is safe, quiet, comfortable, and you want to make sure that it is safe. If the lock is malfunctioning in any reason, of course, if it can't be secured, you obviously, security is one of the main issues here. So you've got to make sure you do it. If the tenants want to add an extra lock on their own to increase security, they can do it with landlord's permission. A lot of people are trying to do those new fandangled Wi-Fi locks. Yeah, but the landlord has to also have a key of some kind. They have to have a code. The tenant can't, stop the landlord from going in. Neither a landlord nor a tenant may be locked out. Yeah. Can the landlord raise the rent? Unless there is a lease, the landlord is legally entitled to raise the rent by any amount, but the landlord must give the tenant at least 30 days notice before the increase takes effect. And this is in a month-to-month tenancy. If you've got a fixed lease, like for 1 year or 6 months or 2 years, whatever it is, then but you've got it, in a fixed lease situation you can't. But if you're given the option, or you're given a rent increase notice to your tenants, the tenants can do two things. They can either agree to pay the new rent or they can move out. So legally, a notice of rent increase is probably the equivalent of a termination of the rental agreement at an old rate, or an offer to rent the same rental unit at a higher rate. So you've got to give proper notice. And then there's some additional information if there's a housing subsidy. What happens if there's a fire, casualty, damage, condemned premises, breaking of the lease? You can sublease, but you have to be very careful because you cannot just have somebody take over the lease. Like they have to be completely vetted. So it says here, generally there's only 2 weeks, 2 ways a tenant can get out of a lease without breaking it. There's a material non-compliance by the landlord with the rental agreement, meaning that they've been a slumlord. They have not done what they're supposed to do. It's not healthy or safe. for them to continue living there, and so then they just move out. Or if the landlord agrees to allow the tenant to sublease the rental unit to a tenant that is qualified for the landlord. So they have to actually do it. But if the tenant decides to move during the term of the lease, the tenant is still usually responsible for the rent for the rest of the lease period. So there is an acceleration clause. So if they're in a 1-year lease and they're 6 months in, they're still responsible for the 6 months of rent unless the rental unit can be re-rented earlier. The landlord is responsible for making a good faith effort to re-rent the unit and may not charge the original tenant rent after the unit is re-rented. Lawful reasons for denial. Here we go. If the landlord decides to not allow the sublease, the landlord must provide written notice to the tenant. The only legal reasons are, this is interesting, insufficient credit standing or financial responsibility of the prospective tenant, too many people for the rental unit, unwillingness of the prospective tenant to accept the terms of the rental agreement, the pets are not acceptable for the potential tenant, prospective tenant proposed commercial activity for the rental unit which is not permitted, or a bad report from a former landlord of the prospective tenant. If the landlord refuses to consent to the sublease but does not give one of those reasons, the tenant can either go ahead with the sublease or terminate the lease and move out. Interesting. You want to give plenty of notice on move out, how much notice is enough, how to deliver the notice, cleaning up and clearing out. Damages, that's always fun. Talking about normal wear and tear, which Alaska defines as deterioration that occurs from the intended use of the rental unit and without negligence, carelessness, accident, misuse, or abuse of the premises or the contents by the tenant, members of the tenant's household, or the tenant's guests and invitees. Landlords and tenants frequently disagree on what constitutes normal wear and tear. So here are a few guidelines. I'm going to keep going because this is probably one of the best normal wear and tear definitions I've seen. Okay, so here are a few guidelines. A family with children or pets will normally wear things out faster than an adult living alone. This type of wear is the landlord's responsibility and must be expected when renting to a family with children or pets. If something cannot be cleaned because of a landlord's act or negligence, it is the landlord's responsibility. This includes things like walls left dirty because non-washable paint and stains on the walls resulting from faulty plumbing. Okay. Dry cleaning draperies and washing walls are a major cleaning task that can typically not be charged against tenant's security deposit if the tenant fails to perform these tasks at the termination of tenancy, unless the tenant dirtied them beyond normal wear and tear. So for example, if the tenant's child drew on the walls with permanent ink, right? And that we've seen that where there's crayon marks and markers all over the place. You cannot, withholding a tenant's security deposit for such tasks would be holding a tenant responsible for normal wear and tear, which you cannot do. Painting the walls, repairing holes in the carpet, and replacing curtains or blind are tenant responsibilities only if such repair or replacement is needed due to tenant negligence. It also is very much dependent on how long the tenants have been there. So that's something you want to take into account. Tenant damage caused by a tenant is tenant's responsibility, even if it was caused by accident or the actions of a tenant's guests. The landlord may keep enough of the deposit to repair such damage. If the tenant has purposefully destroyed the landlord's property, like by throwing a rock through the window, smashing furniture, taking a sledgehammer to the wall, and it costs more than $250 to fix, the tenant may be guilty of criminal mischief and could face imprisonment and fines and still have to pay for the damage. Interesting. Okay, returning the deposit. If the tenant has given proper notice of moving out, the landlord must provide written itemized lists of accrued rent deducted from the security deposit along with any refund due to the tenant within 14 days of the date of the tenancy is terminated and possession is delivered by the tenant. So mainly, you've got 14 days after the tenant vacates it. The landlord also has 30 days if the tenant fails to give proper notice of moving out. And when the landlord keeps the deposit. Now, remember, the landlord keeping the deposit is a big deal because that's not the landlord's money, that's the tenant's money. So typically you start a different type of lawsuit in this, right? So when the landlord keeps the deposit, when a tenant moves out, he or she has the right to get the full security deposit if no damage has been done beyond that caused by normal wear and tear and the rent is paid. So there is another aspect to all of this. Termination of tenancy, termination for late rent. So this is talking about all the different things, whether you're terminating for cause, termination for failing to pay utility bills, termination for breach of duties, mischief, landlord's termination of rental agreement by choice, meaning typically they either giving notice that they want to shift tenants, or maybe they want to move in. Termination in mobile home tenancies, then anyway, that's in here. Termination for absence or abandonment, and then what is abandonment? Abandoned belongings. This is one of the high points of our framework, so I'm going to hit this one here. If a tenant moves out or abandons a rental unit, leaving personal belongings behind, a landlord must notify the tenant where the property is being stored, that the tenant has a minimum of 15 days to remove the property, which that time period may be lengthened at the discretion of the landlord, and what the landlord intends to do with the property if it is not removed. So it can be a very simple letter, and I think there is actually a pre-made form here about this. Belongings not removed within that time may be sold at public sale if of sufficient value, disposed of if the landlord sees fit, especially if it's food or something perishable, or destroyed or otherwise disposed of, such as charitable donation, when the cost of having a public sale would exceed the value of the items, or the items do not sell at a public sale, then you can donate them. And you've got to act in good faith. Serving notices to quit. This is all about how to serve it. Foreclosure problems. What happens if the house goes into foreclosure? Tenant protections after foreclosure and now it's bank owned or lender owned. Lockoffs, utilities, shutoffs, and threats. Retaliation by the landlord. Now, landlord retaliation is where the landlord is trying to basically get the tenant out, either by an eviction, whether it's right or wrong, decreasing the amenities included in the unit, or increasing the rent. So you're doing something retaliatory against the tenant because the tenant has done something. So, and there's usually a period, there's a time frame where anything that is done within that time frame is considered retaliatory, and the landlord can't do this. So here it is. So the landlord may not retaliate against a tenant because the tenant complains about the landlord's failure to perform landlord responsibilities. The tenant seeks to enforce his or her legal rights under the Act, the Alaska Landlord Tenant Act. The tenant organizes or joins a tenant union or something similar, or a tenant complains to a government agency like code enforcement or governmental housing about wage, price, or rent controls. And the law prohibits retaliation by the landlord by raising the rent, decreasing the services such as shutting off utilities, or starting or threatening to start an eviction process against the tenant. If the tenant is subject to illegal retaliation, a tenant can terminate the tenancy, move out, or defend against eviction and stay, and in either case sue up to 1.2 times, 1.5 times the tenant's actual damages. Now it doesn't have a time frame in here. Usually there's some kind of a time frame that the landlord has, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, a year. There is no time frame in here, which means it just says you can't. However, when it's not retaliation, which is the exact next section, and this is on page 36, it says an eviction proceeding is not considered illegal retaliation if the landlord in good faith acts because the tenant is behind in rent, the landlord needs the rental unit vacant to make repairs needed to make the code requirements if the tenant was complaining of said code requirements. The tenant is using the rental unit for illegal activity. The landlord wants to use the rental unit for something other than a residential dwelling for at least 6 months, or for personal purposes. They want to move in. The landlord wants to substantially remodel or demolish the unit, or the property is being sold and the new owner intends to use it for personal use. And a rent increase is not considered illegal if the landlord can show in good faith a recent sizable increase in taxes or costs of maintaining the property, including the cost of repairing something sizable because of the tenant's complaint, which is reasonable. Or similar rental units are being rented for a higher rate, or there are no similar rental units in the area and the proposed rent does not exceed fair rental value of the rental unit. If you're wondering how to find that, you can go to Housing and Urban Development, fair market rent for your area. I think you put in your zip code and you can find it. The last one, a rent increase is not considered illegal if a landlord can show in good faith that true costs of major improvements made to the property are being passed on to all the tenants fairly and equally. And then it talks about if the tenant doesn't move, when a problem arises, where to go for help. Oh, you notice that in landlord retaliation, there was no time frame. It was just a landlord cannot retaliate, period. So, but it did have an out saying, okay, a landlord is not going to retaliate, and it's not retaliation if it's this. So there's a ton of places to go for help. This is on page 39, Alaska Law Help website. I'm just going to click on this, open a new tab. Alaska, oh, I had this one open, Alaska Law Help org. So eviction and other landlord tenant issues, foreclosure, home ownership. Popular resources are on the left-hand side. This is actually really helpful. So keep in mind, this is all here. More information on court proceedings and evictions, you can go to the Alaska Court System's website, and then there's an additional information booklet specifically about eviction, information for landlords and tenants about forcible entry, detainer actions. So make sure if you are new to this, you want to click on that, get that PDF, or even print it out. Also, the Alaska Court System website contains information regarding eviction diversion program, which is, it sounds like that's the mediation where they're trying to work things out, especially if it's not money related. Yeah, parties can go to sign up. That's exactly what it is. Alaska Landlord Tenant Helpline. So this is really key. If you are undercapitalized, you may not have money as a landlord in Alaska, you want to make sure that you can get a couple of questions answered. And here's how you do it. Alaska Landlord Tenant Helpline is staffed by volunteer attorneys every Monday through Thursday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. The toll-free number you can call from anywhere in Alaska is 855-743-1001. I'll say it again, 855-743-1001. There's a number of other locations that you can go to for help. There's probably 8 more. A lot of these are regarding fair housing, maybe discrimination, to report a licensed property manager who's violated a law. You want to make sure you're asking questions, and you can. And then the last part of this, this is all sample notice forms, and these are actually really well done. I'm pretty happy with this. So what you do is you print them. You have to print them and then you write on them. So it's a sample, but you can still use it. Keep a copy of this notice. You can use it. Notice to landlord, termination month-to-month tenancy. So this is to the land. So this is from the tenant to the landlord explaining this. I will be moving out, and then the record of service. So you want to make sure that as a tenant serving the landlord, whether you mail it or personally served, registered by certified mail. That's very important. And it goes on whether you're doing a termination, defects in essential services. So this is a complaint. This is a tenant that's complaining that something is wrong. And it says, if it not fix the defects immediately, I have a right to, and then you have the tenants have their remedies. This is the notice to or need to repair and deduct from rent. You can do that. You can see notice of landlord of termination of tenancy for violation of the rental agreement or law. So these are all really interesting, and the fact that they have them is great. And let's see, non-payment of rent. So this is notice to tenant and termination of tenancy for non-payment of rent. So this is from the landlord to the tenant. Here's the address of the rental unit. Notified that you owe rent in this amount, does not include any late fees that you must owe. You may not be evicted for non-payment of late fees. If you do not pay this rent by the date stated below, which must be at least 7 days. So 7 days is your grace period. We'll call it a grace period, but basically you're already in trouble. You want to make sure you've got 7 days to pay, date and time by which the rent must be paid. So what you want to do is, if your rent is due on the 1st, it's not paid by the 2nd, it's got to be 7 days, but you've also got to serve them. So what I would do is I would serve them on day 2 or day 3, and then add 7 days. So that means that their date and time by which the rent must be paid, you can say it's the 10th, but you can also say it's the 15th. But again, you have to know this as a landlord. If you have your mortgage payment and they are not paying their rent, if you can't go that long and you're just going to be stressed right out, you're going to have to maybe make a call to the lender and just say, look, I have a tenant who's not paying rent. I can't pay you right now, or whatever. I'm just saying that it can get very awkward. But you want to make sure in this date calculation that you're calculating the serving of them also. Okay. Non-payment of utilities, notice to tenant for termination of tenancy for violation of the agreement or the law. So if they're having issues with the law. Intentional damage to premises, meaning they're being malicious. Yep. And this was interesting. It says, you or someone in control of deliberately inflicted substantial damage, loss, destruction, or defacement exceeding $400 to the above premises as follows. And then you write in what it is. So let's say a kid backs up a bathtub and it floods all over the 2nd floor and goes into the 1st floor. You bet that is going to be more than $400. So that can be, you can terminate for that. Notice to tenant for illegal activity. Increase of rent, here it is. This is for month to month. This is increasing the rent. And of course, then your record of service, security deposit offset statement. So this is when a tenant departs, date of dependent departure from premises. This was the original deposit. Offset rent due to landlord, meaning they didn't pay rent. Offset due to damages of premises, and then offset items below. You've got to actually, it says attach continuation sheets, estimates, receipts as necessary, total offsets, and then about amount due to tenant, if any, check enclosed. Yeah, interesting how that all works. Okay, let's keep going because we still have a few more resources here. This was this one, AlaskaLawHelp.org, eviction and other landlord tenant issues. I'm just going to click on this. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me going in and it's taking a bit. So I'm going to have a swig of water. And it's still churning. All right, I'm going to keep going. Oh, that's the same one. Oh, it's stuck. Okay. So then this is the Alaska court system self-help. Now this is forms. And so I have put this link in here. You come up right here, but forms by topic. If you look down here, eviction and landlord tenant matters, you click on that hyperlink and it jumps down here. So you've got eviction notice to quit for non-payment of rent. I'm going to just go to that one. And what do you know? This is actually the fillable one. So the one that we had seen in the guide was the sample. This is the real one that you do. So tenant, rental address. So you can see it and it doesn't say sample at the top. And then at the end, it says, here's how you actually do this. Do not ignore, yeah. So this is to the tenant. Pretty cool how they've done this. Information sheet for an eviction case. This is a tenant, this is continuing, yeah. All right. Post-conviction relief. Yeah, okay, here we go. Let's keep going. This one, housing issues. Again, this is still more of the Alaska court system self-help. Starting an eviction case, preparing for a hearing, damages. No, okay, let's just talk through this for a minute. If you are nearby the courthouse, now if you're flying in to do this hearing, if you have to appear in person now, a lot of times in rural areas, then you can appear by Zoom. This is different. If you have to show up in person and it's feasible for you to show up in person in advance, I recommend you do a walkthrough in advance, like go the day before or the week before even. Learn where to park. How does the parking meters go? Do you have to feed the parker? Is there a time limit? Where do you go in? How does the metal detectors work? All of these things, the more familiar that you are, the less anxiety you're going to feel. I've done, unfortunately, as a landlord, I've done a bit of this. And so I always feel better knowing, okay, I need quarters to feed the parking meters. A lot of places have the automatic ones, but not all of them. So yes, I go in this door, or this is what I have to do, or I can't take my cuticle clippers in the courthouse because they're going to think it's a weapon, so I have to leave those at home. This is the kind of stuff that you want to get through if you're going to show up to a hearing in person, or if you have to show up to a hearing in person. Make sure you walk through what you're going to do, or if you have to hire an attorney, or if you are working with a bailiff, just pick their brains so that you're not so anxious about this. This can get really upsetting, right? It can get really awkward. And even if you're on a Zoom call, you want to make sure that you're trying to breathe and calm down, because you can be emotionally charged. The tenant can be emotionally charged. And this is very official. So just really try to take deep breaths and prepare in advance. So you've got a landlord spot here. You've got a tenant spot here. And then this was the eviction book they were talking about, glossary of housing terms, forms, housing laws, steps. So there's a bunch of quick links. And again, this is the Alaska Court self-help system. Okay, Alaska Legal Services Corporations, there are locations all over the place. So whichever one, and there's even one way up here. So whichever one is closest to you, you can either phone them or you can go there. They'll probably help you on how to do this. So this is all their information, all of their emails, their office hours, their phone numbers. Don't be shy. If you have a question, please use these folks. They're waiting to help you. The last one I'm going to give you is the Alaska Bar Association, the Lawyer Referral Service. Now, this one, if you need help, this will help you with, again, it's Alaska Lawyer Referral Service. Now, it says specifically what it is, what it does, what you can do, and what they won't do. So make sure, and how much it is. It's not free. So you want to make sure that you are clear on what you need and be very specific and quick. Don't tell them a story for an hour because it's going to cost you. You want to make sure you have your questions ready to go. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go through this one. Tenant application fee. There was a tenant application fee. So what I'm doing is I'm going through my standard checklist of everything that I kind of look for of what did we see? Did we go through that? Did we see it? Did we not? And this is my checklist here. So tenant application fee, we did see it. Grace period without late rent, without penalty, and the late fee amount. We didn't see the late fee amount, but we did see that a late fee is authorized. Security deposit, yes, and also with a pet deposit. Pre-made forms, yes. Lease wording and details, yes. Pets and animals, there was a discussion about pet deposit. Delivery of signed lease required, not that I saw. Condition inspection at move-in, yes. Standard letter warnings or wording, yes. Required maintenance inspections, no. How often rent increase? We did not see how often, but how much of a rent increase, how much notice for a rent increase, all that was in there. Nothing about renter's insurance. The end of a fixed lease, is it abrupt? Yes. In Alaska, it looks like it is abrupt. Condition inspection at move out? Yes. Return of deposit or bond? Return of deposit? Yes. 14 days after the tenant departs after proper notice. Use of the deposit as last month's rent and damages? Yes, you can use that. That's interesting. Landlord retaliation defined? Yes. Is there a timing aspect? No, but it says when retaliation, when it's not retaliation, that's different. And third-party housing for disputes, or do you go right to court? It looks like there is a mediation option, but you do have to go to court to actually get a judgment. Okay, we talked about nuances. We went through the whole thing. What about to do about abandoned items? And where to get help. We talked a lot about this, and I gave you the landlord tenant helpline staffed by volunteer attorneys Monday to Thursday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. I'm going to give it to you again, 855-743-1001, toll free in Alaska. So let me just sum up in each of my location specific podcasts. It's the same way, same framework, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of that location's tenancy laws? What are some of the nuances? What do you do with abandoned items left behind by a tenant in that location? And then where do you start to get help? Now, this is the same format for every location specific podcast. So if you're looking at a different location or you're about to buy rentals in a different location, this is exactly the same format. But again, this episode is not all inclusive. This is not everything, and things do and can and will change. So make sure you do your own due diligence. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you are either new to real estate or you're new to real estate in Alaska. Things you can do to help yourself are make sure you read all these resources, read the act. Also, check out if you have a local meetup group in your city, county, parish, location, even by Zoom. If you can get in the same room, even Zoom room with other Alaska landlords and ask questions that you have, they will teach you. They're happy to teach you. They don't want to see you mess up. Okay, so make sure you're looking at that. Otherwise, you can jump on social media. There are tons of national landlord groups. You'll see me in there as well, that you can ask your questions and say, hey, I'm in Alaska. This is my question. What do I do? Local folks are asking questions just like you are. So just get in the same rooms as them. If you've learned something from today's show, please leave me a review on whatever platform you are listening to. If you're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, that really helps other people who need my services find me. Really appreciate that. Today I'm recording this episode in Memphis, Tennessee. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 147, about the great province of Saskatchewan. I'll see you there.